The Court of Azathoth reviews Polaris by H.P. Lovecraft. All right, hello and welcome back to the show. I am Reese, and I'm of course being joined by the one and only, the irreplaceable Zach. Welcome back, sir.
Oh.
This is a pretty grand intro, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You better live up to it in this episode. No pressure.
All right. No pressure.
By the end of it, you're fired. We need a new co-host.
Aww.
He was late, damn it. He made me wait.
In my defense, I was eating steak, and it was delicious, so...
Okay, yeah, I'll forgive it. I understand that. Just make sure... Did you ever look up that Call of Cthulhu game that came out semi-recently?
Oh, I didn't. I forgot all about it.
Yeah, it doesn't matter, but it's just kind of a mild spoiler. There's a point when... it's revealed that the meat that this town's been eating is all some horrible possessed squid flesh.
Oh.
That drives them insane. And I'm just making sure you didn't consume any of that.
No, I don't think so.
Well, how would you know?
I don't know. I don't know, actually. I'm not sure.
What is reality? You don't know.
I don't know.
Anyway.
Everything outside my perception's just densely packed Hitlers.
You can't trust your own senses. So you were saying just a few minutes ago you did some follow-up research on the Fallout feedback we got last time. The mission that was Lovecraft inspired. What did you find out about that?
Okay, so I actually remember this quest. I had forgotten all about it. But the quest line is called The Dark Heart of Blackhall, and it's part of the Point Lookout add-on, which is the best, hands down, the best one. Like, it was so good. It was so much fun. It involves a bunch of choices around a few characters. When you first get to that point, you run into a few characters. There's one called Obadiah Blackhall, and he tasks you. He's the leader of a bunch of tribal natives, and he tasks you with tracking down a book that was stolen from him and taken to a ritual site. And upon leaving his house, you come across a character named Marcella, who's a missionary, and she claims that Obadiah actually wants the book for more than just a keepsake, which is probably true, and plans to use it for a ritual to control the swamp folk. And so after you go and you get the book, you're basically left with a choice. You can either give it to Marcella, or you can give it to Obadiah. And if you attempt to give it to Marcella, Marcella dies. She gets murdered while you're off retrieving the book. And so you can take it... you can either destroy the book at an altar at the ritual site, or you can take it and you can give it to Obadiah. Trying to see here. So if you destroy the book, I think it gives you like a stat bonus of some kind, and then like some XP. And then if you give the book to Obadiah, it gives the player 1,000 caps. and he'll still go to nothing really changes after that. The quest line kind of just ends. The reason I didn't remember this at first is because when I did this quest line, I just gave Obadiah the book, and then I killed Obadiah and took the book back. So the game just lets you do that, and then you can keep the book as a keepsake. But the book's called the what's it called? The Kriv Bekni is the name of the book, and it's obviously a reference to the Necronomicon. So,
because isn't this the one that's made out of skin?
Yeah.
All right, that makes sense. What are the other? Just to reiterate, in case we missed anything from the last time we talked about this, what were some of the other connections this DLC had to what we do here?
Well, there's a few Lovecraft references in this particular quest line. Well, I mean, obviously the whole thing is just one big Lovecraft quest. The building that the ritual site is in is called the Dunwich Building, for instance. It's like a big factory, kind of. Mm-hmm. And then the ritual site's underneath it. And it looks like the ritual site was there even before the nukes were dropped. So this is something that's been going on for a while. It says here there's a holotape. Marcella's tent. After you find her body, and upon listening to it, she begs the player character to destroy the book. I thought this was kind of interesting. There's actually an alternate plot to the quest line that they cut out. And rather than asking the player character to seek the book directly, Obadiah would instead request that a letter be delivered to Marcella, and that this letter is revealed to be a plea for help. And Marcella describes Obadiah as a good man, but his family has an evil past. So in the quest line that came out, Obadiah is the one that has Marcella killed. I'm pretty sure. But in the alternate one, they were buddies. And it looked like they were trying to keep the book from a certain tribe of locals called the Krivibi. I'm reading the wiki, so that's where I'm getting a lot of this from. He's like the last Black Hall, I guess. There's like some connection between his family and the book. And the Krivibi worship the book. So, yeah. But I don't know why that one didn't go anywhere. They decided to remove a lot of that stuff.
It's still interesting that they would even bother throwing that in.
Yeah, there's some other stuff in here too. Says that once you pick up the book, Marcella will be found dead in her tent, even if you take it straight to Obadiah. You can question him about her death, but he'll deny any involvement unless pressed. When he'll hint he arranged it, he shows no remorse and instead insists there's no reason to hold on to the book. But she's right, you can't do anything with it after you have it. It's just sort of in your inventory. But I killed him and took it anyway. I was already evil, so...
It's just a very, a souvenir that you paid a heavy price for.
Well, I mean, I didn't know this Marcella person, so she paid the price, not me.
You paid a price, not a very heavy one, though.
Yeah.
Huh. Very cool. And of course, the feedback that we got last time involved that being a viewer's first exposure to Lovecraft, so it can happen even in the smallest ways that we would totally look over otherwise.
Yeah, well, like I said, video games are a way that a lot of people are probably exposed to Lovecraft without even realizing it, because so many video games are based off of Lovecraft.
It's
Or
because
have
video
sex.
games are made by geeks, and geeks
Yeah.
love Lovecraft. It's just how it goes.
Yep.
You just have to. But yeah, very interesting. I would love to hear more feedback like that. So by all means, leave a comment, email in. What was your first exposure to the Mythos, or at least in the case of Fallout, what was clearly supposed to be an allusion to the Mythos? I always love hearing stories like that.
Yeah.
Well, we don't really have too much else in the way of news, so I think we're just going to get into the story from there.
So we reviewed this week. We're reviewing Polaris, and this was a short story written in 1918 and first published in 1920 in a journal called The Philosopher.
It should be said that this is the first of the dream cycle stories.
Right.
So
this is the first of what is called the dream cycle. It says here in the wiki that it's one of his most autobiographical stories.
Oh yeah, that is very obvious.
I would agree with that like wholeheartedly. We don't actually get the narrator's name in this one, but
that is usually the case. It seems.
Yeah, but he seems very Lovecrafty. It starts off with him kind of describing like his home where he lives, which is in a swamp or just south of a swamp, rather. And so he I guess his bed faces his north window, and he gets a real good look at the North Star, Polaris, every night when he goes to sleep. And I think this bothers him like a lot. Like he seems to like really like, I don't know, like he doesn't just move, but he can't he can't sleep
or get blinds, maybe.
Yeah, or like shut the window or something. But he just he can't sleep with the star looking at him. It feels like to him that the star is like kind of staring at him. Like it's trying to tell him something.
This is it's a theme that we've seen before, and I'm sure we're going to see it again. And it's something that I wasn't even really expecting going into this podcast. But
well, the way he writes it like it's very nonchalant, like it's just kind of a thing, like a nightly ritual of his that he almost goes through. He doesn't like, you don't really get like the message that like he might be a little crazy, that maybe he might be a bit like, I don't know, paranoid or something. That is like starting to show like a little bit, and it's starting to affect like his ability to get sleep.
But I'm more saying about this story in general. This story is trying to make the North Star something horrific. And keep in mind that this is a symbol, and has long been a symbol of hope for people. Mm-hmm. It very much reminded me of when we reviewed Dagon, and the sailor or the merchant who's stranded at sea discovers land, and normally this would be something to be celebrated, but so that was another thing that would normally be hopeful or helpful that has been twisted in a Lovecraft story. Mm-hmm. And it was just, it's such a weird premise. Even just at the beginning, the way he's describing these other constellations, they'll show up for part of the year and then they'll leave, but you know, there's that damn pole star just stays there, stays in place, doesn't move. It's like he describes it as this watching eye, like it's Sauron or some shit.
Yeah, and that's another thing too, is he never refers to it as Polaris or the North Star. He refers to it only as the pole star.
Yes.
Which I guess was probably like the colloquialism maybe back then or whatever. But
yeah,
he says it with quite a bit of ominous like feeling to it. He's clearly afraid of it almost. Yeah, there's definitely like a fear here. Like he feels like the star itself like seems to be trying to tell him something. He's not sure what that something is. But anyway, he starts having these dreams when he does manage to get some sleep, where he sees images of a city made entirely out of marble, and it's situated on a plateau between two mountains. And as time goes on, he gets more and more like obsessive about this city, and just everything about it, its people, its culture. Like he eventually gets so drawn into it that he kind of becomes a member of this civilization. Anyway, he begins having these dreams, about this city, this Marble City. He wants to learn more and more about it. Eventually, he gets so drawn into the dream that he seems to almost take up residence there. He seems to be so drawn into this world that it's more real to him than the real world is. In fact, he begins to.
He's no longer content to be an observer.
Yeah, he's no longer content to just observe what's going on in this city. He wants to be a part of it. And so eventually, like, his dream kind of just becomes a reality, and it's interesting. This is where he gets very Lord Dunsany-y. And I've talked about this before. But this particular story is very close to Lord Dunsany's style, and
which is funny because Lovecraft claimed that he had not read any of Dunsany.
Well, you're right.
After this.
Right, but both Dunsany and Lovecraft took a lot from Poe. So Edgar Allan, a lot of Edgar Allan Poe's work probably was a big influence on this work as well.
Yes.
And they were both big fans of his, so that's probably where a lot of the similarity comes from. Although I'm not gonna lie, I think, it says here whose work he would not read for another year. So yeah, he didn't read Dunsany's work until a year after he wrote this. But that's probably where a lot of their similarities come from, at least in this particular story.
Mm-hmm.
Since they were both writing at around the same time. He describes an aurora over his house in the swamp. The first time he dreams of this city. And he just seems to get more drawn into the dream every time he has it.
And it should be said that the significance of the pole star in this dream world that he's visiting and taking up residence in, the pole star is it's much more visible. It's very much a part of this world.
Right. And it's also worth noting that in this world, the pole star is directly overhead.
Mm-hmm.
Where he is, which indicates he's in the North Pole.
There's more clues that he's more north,
right,
than he usually is.
Right. He says once he gets really drawn into the dream, he takes up like the aspect of like one of its citizens. And this is probably worth talking about in and of itself, like forever, because after he gets real drawn into this dream, he starts talking to the people of the city, and they're all worried, right? Because they're being invaded by these creatures called the Inulos, or the Inutos?
Yes,
Inulos?
I think that's right.
Inutos.
Who are described as squat, yellow fiends.
That just kind of arose out of the west of the world, and they've been raiding villages and have taken all the fortified locations, and they're ready to move in and take over. And they're all worried about that. And one of the another sign that you're in the north, like in the north of the world, like the North Pole north, is he talks about how the sun doesn't really go up into the sky; it just kind of travels along the horizon. It doesn't really ever set.
Very true. That's a good catch. He at this point he meets Alos, who because he's taken some form in this world. The city is called Azathoth.
Mm-hmm.
In the dream, he has memories of of Alos being his friend, and Alos is the commander of the army.
Right. And the plateau is called Sarkis, in the land of Lomar, which is the kingdom being besieged by the Inutos. And his city happens to be one of the last surviving strongholds for his people, I guess. Everybody else has pretty much fallen to these Inutos already. And during the invasion, his friend gives him the task of being the watchman for the watchtower. And
because he's and we'll get back to this in a minute, I'm sure, but he's not fit for battle.
Right. He's got a weak constitution, I guess. He he faints or something.
At the sight of blood.
Sight of blood, probably. Yeah, he's probably.
But he's good for something, so they put him in the watchtower.
Yeah, which it was funny because he says right away that he's been up for days and days at a time because of all the excitement. He hasn't been wanting to sleep, so he's up in the watchtower for a long time. He's up there for several days without sleeping because he's worried about the enemy encroaching on his home. And he starts looking at the pole star. You can see it from his window in the watchtower, and he starts gazing out over the valley, and he starts nodding off a little bit. Then when he comes to, he's back in his house in the swamp.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, and he's losing his mind because he is convinced that this is in fact the dream world, and that he needs to get back to the waking world, which is the world of Lomar, the world of the Inutos. He starts to get very upset with everyone around him when they start telling him that he's just been dreaming and hallucinating, and that none of this is real. Because when he starts describing where he was, they tell him that sounds like the North Pole, and that is just ice. It's always been ice. It's never been anything else.
Yeah, there's no cities there. There's no civilization.
There's no civilization. But it is worth knowing that it's dominated by a squat and yellow race of people called Eskimos.
Oh, man. And the way it ends is a repetition of a line we heard before about the pole star.
Mm-hmm. Right at the beginning. It's the same line.
Yeah, well, I've got it right here. The pole star, evil and monstrous, leers down the black vault, winking hideously like an insane watching eye, which strives to convey some strange message, yet recalls nothing save that it once had a message to convey.
Yeah. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention, super important. While he's dozing off in the watchtower, he does get a look at the pole star, and it appears to start reciting a poem to him. And he can sense that it's a malign presence, that the pole star is evil.
Mm-hmm.
The poem goes, "Slumber, watcher, till the spheres 26,000 years have revolved, and I return to the spot where I now burn. Where now I burn. Other stars anon shall rise to the axis of the skies, stars that soothe and stars that bless with a sweet forgetfulness. Only when my round is o'er shall the past disturb thy door."
Yes, and that's the poem that kind of that does him in after his days of sleeplessness.
Yep.
And he falls asleep on guard duty, and that plays into his guilt. He feels he has betrayed his fair city of Alathaway
Yep.
and betrayed his friends.
Yep.
So there's a lot we left out, and there's a lot of things that we can get into. But overall, what are you thinking about this one?
I really dug the story.
Yeah, I know. Like, isn't it? It's we've had two. The past two were comedies, and this is so different. This is such a, and it's not even his typical. I mean, we can note the Poe influence and the Dunsanian influence that he wasn't even aware of, but so it's not even what most people will be used to when they think of a Lovecraft story, but it's still very distinctly Lovecraft, and it's just so different. So we're back in the swing of things. We're starting this dream cycle. We're gonna get some really I'd consider some of his best stories in this. Yeah, no, it's really exciting.
I thought this whole short story was also really interesting because it's a play on the works of a Chinese philosopher named Zhuangzi, he was famous for waking up one day after dreaming he was a butterfly, and he asks if he was really dreaming he's a butterfly or if he's a butterfly that just started dreaming he's Zhuangzi. Yeah, you can definitely see the Poe in this, which Poe isn't really necessarily known for his works of straight fantasy.
No.
But this is definitely a really heavily you can really feel the prose, the Edgar Allan Poe prose in this. And I thought it was really interesting that you could really see the Dunsany in this too, even if it's not necessarily a direct influence. It's pretty obvious where they draw their influences from in that respect.
Mm-hmm. And we'll see more. We'll see more of that influence later, after, of course, he's actually read Dunsany.
Yeah.
But before we get into any of the really heavy hitting themes, I did want to mention a couple things offhand that I think their introduction in this story, they weren't maybe intended to be all that important, but have gone on to have some significance in the mythos. Mm-hmm. So this is our first mention, and I messaged you about this. This is the first mention of the Nopkes. Mm-hmm. I never pronounced that right. Even though the HP Lovecraft wiki is kind of strange in how they recite this, because it insists their first appearance is in the horror in the museum, but then it also says that they appear in his early Dunsanian tales, so they need to make up their minds on that.
Yeah.
their first true, I'll correct the wiki here, their first true appearance is here, even though they're only mentioned as a race of cannibals that the Lemurians have had to do battle with in the past. And honestly, if you look up like concept art of these Nopkes, they're pretty damn frightening. They're like 6-limbed, abominable snowman monstrosities. They are the scariest fucking things that you could ever encounter in some North Pole setting. So yeah, they're introduced, and we also get a mention of the Panacotic manuscripts. So this is the first kind of magic book. Predates the Necronomicon too. Yep. That's worth mentioning. Yep. And they don't really have much significance. I mean, they're basically here. They're just a placeholder for some kind of magic tome.
Yeah, some kind of Bible almost. Yeah.
Later on, in the mythos, we'll see if we actually get this with Lovecraft or with some of his disciples, I guess, the people who took after him. But originally, this manuscript is supposed to have been written by the Yithians. So we'll see where that comes in the future. Was there anything else along those lines you were picking up in this one?
I haven't really been able to like piece together like Easter eggs or anything like that, or stuff we'll see in other lore later.
Yeah, I'm sure I missed a ton of shit.
I was really interested in his the psychological aspects of this. It really explores a lot of like almost schizophrenic themes, and it makes me wonder if maybe Lovecraft didn't maybe suffer for some form of mild schizophrenia.
Oh, I would not be at all surprised. Not at all.
The very idea of confusing the dream world with reality is something you can definitely tell that he was playing on some mental health themes in this. So I thought that was really interesting.
What do you think about our introduction to the Dreamlands?
You can tell that this was probably originally intended to be just like a one-off, that he decided later to expand upon this idea. But
yeah, I don't recall if there's and we're going to be seeing a lot of the future stories here soon, but I'd be interested to see if there are references to Azathoth and everything that's Sarkis and all that. Because I didn't really recall them. I remember a lot of the other locations in the Dreamlands, but this was my first time with this one. So
yeah.
But anyway, sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh no, it's fine. I think I actually did this story in school too, and I seem to remember that Azathoth is referenced in later stories. I can't say exactly which ones off the top of my head, but I think I've heard it referenced before in other Lovecraft stories involving the dream cycle, or that reference the dream cycle. So, and I've never heard of Sarkis outside of this story, but in the SCP universe, the Sarkis is the name of a cult. People that worship a Daedric entity called the Scarlet King. So,
very
that's interesting bit of information there.
Huh.
Yeah.
So, we had to get into it at some point, but we have another narrator who's very clearly an avatar for H.P. Lovecraft. Yeah, I mean, that's not going to be the last time, obviously. But what were you thinking about the autobiographical elements of this story? Because there's a really obvious one, but then I think there's one that's not so obvious. But what were you thinking about that?
I've noticed any time that Lovecraft puts himself in these stories, he always puts his home, like where he grew up in these stories, as well.
Yes.
The brick house in the middle of a swamp, like in the middle of nowhere, out in frickin' rural.
And the way it's described at the end, because he believes that his actual home is really the dream. It's some unnatural dream that he needs to be free from.
Yeah.
People always have this fear of, you might be in the middle of a dream and you wake up and you have some feeling that you didn't accomplish everything you meant to. Yeah. And you can never go back. It's kind of a fleeting moment type feeling when you realize, oh, none of that was real. Now I'm awake. Now I can actually do things. But this story takes that fear up to 11.
It really does. Because he's convinced that he's been transported to a dream world, that he's stuck there, that some entity basically forced him to fall asleep, and now his people are probably being slaughtered. There's nothing he can do about it.
You know what? It kind of reminds me, and I'm not even claiming this is an influence, it would have come out before, but John Carter a little bit.
Yep.
There's something there, and I'm not even saying it's an homage, but there's a similarity, and we're going to see this in other stories that take place in the dream cycle.
Yep.
The other autobiographical parts that are interesting, obviously, the character is weak-willed or whatever, has the weak constitution, very much like Lovecraft, who couldn't serve in the war and still feels some guilt over that because of his health. So this character mirrors Lovecraft in that way. And this is a story that I also think that it takes the racial undertones and uses them in a very interesting way. I mentioned this a couple episodes ago, I believe, but I said something along the lines of, I'm not against basically, I'm not against reading the fiction from the mind of a person who maybe had questionable views on a race. And part of the reason is, well, one, obviously he's a great writer and he's dead and it doesn't matter. But two, I think that he is so self-aware about that it actually bleeds into the story at the end. Because it's almost this, it's almost a parody of an ancient man coming to the modern world, and when he's talking about this horrible invasion of Inuits, the modern people kindly correct him in a very politically correct way and say, no, we call them Eskimos. Like, that is clearly a part of this story, and that might make some people uncomfortable that Inuits are described in such and even if we're supposed to assume that they're Inuits, because it does take place. I think this is part of the reason.
It's a pretty clear draw. It's pretty clear that he was referring to Inuits.
Yes, there is that. But I think that you had a point when you said that maybe this was intended to just kind of be a one-off thing, because if we're supposed to take that literally, does that mean that the Dreamlands is actually a portal to the past, how things were on Earth in the past, or are the Dreamlands their own dimension?
That's something that we'll definitely explore more thoroughly as we get into more Dreamlands works.
Because I always took them to be at like a completely different place.
Yeah. Well, I think that's how a lot of the later stories are written too. But in this particular story, it's almost written like this is something that happened like on Earth thousands of years ago, and that there used to be a land. Of course, now we know that like there's no land mass under the North Pole. It's just ice. It's just an ice sheet.
You know, it's also possible that while he's describing this, and he's describing all of these things that you mentioned that clearly place his city in the north, and he's describing Inutos being the invaders, maybe the people of the real world just took that to mean, oh, the Inuits, those are Eskimos. Maybe they do take some inspiration from that group, but they weren't intended to actually be them in the story.
It's possible. It's possible that he was actually referring to some other like creature or something. Mm-hmm.
Although it's not clear on the other races too, because the and again, this is kind of where the extended mythos messes things up sometimes. But the Napkas are referred to as cannibals. Mm-hmm. But I always took it that they were an animalistic species. Are they cannibal? What? It's a very specific description. So what does that mean? And I'd like someone to maybe write in and sort that out. Are they cannibal humans? Were they intended to be cannibal humans?
It's possible that they're a play on a creature called the Wendigo.
Who are cannibals.
Who are Correct.
They were humans who gave in to cannibalism and became creatures. I can see the illusion there, but it's just an interesting thing, because in any depiction I've seen of the Nopkas, they don't look humanoid in the slightest, really.
Right. And then the Lomari are described as being tall and gray-eyed, and I assume white. But whatever. I could be wrong, but this just sounds to me like it's pretty obvious that Inutos is supposed to be Inuit, and that's probably who he's talking about. I mean, I could be. It's possible that.
Yeah, no, I don't deny that he took influence when he wrote the story.
It's unnecessary for him to even bring Eskimos up, unless that's what he was thinking of.
He definitely took influence. I don't deny that. I'm just saying, in the context of the story, I'm wondering where these places even are.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if, at some point in this Earth's history, Azathoth was a real city.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there's a lot of references to, like, forgotten civilizations and stuff. You'll see a lot of that, especially in the dream cycle. There's definitely a physical connection somewhere between the Dreamlands and Earth.
And in this story, it's through Polaris.
Right, and I think there's a history there. So I don't know if Polaris itself is like an entity, or is necessarily like some kind of, like, I don't know, watcher deity or something. Maybe a manifestation of Nyarlathotep or something, because he says the star itself is evil. Like, he doesn't like the star. He's afraid of it. This is something that bothers him, like, the entire time, through his dreams of Azathoth, through everything. Like, the star's always watching, and seems to be using him for some kind of goal, almost.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. It makes me wonder if maybe he wasn't originally, like, an inhabitant of the city, and maybe he did actually go through all of this in, like, a previous life or something. I don't know what his views on reincarnation were, or how that would affect a story like this, but
yeah, I don't believe he believed in that personally.
I don't think so either.
I'm trying to look in the story where he mentions the beginning phrase. I'm going to find it real quick, because it might really... Okay, there it is. It might change the message of the end. Because you're right. Okay, so he says the same thing about the pole star at the beginning and the end.
Right.
And then he says, sometimes when it is cloudy, I can sleep.
Right.
So he can only sleep when the stars are not looking at him. But I do wonder if this observation, if the repetition of the phrase at the beginning at the end also signifies that he's going to go through the same experience, and just this endless cycle of not knowing which world is where he really belongs.
That's kind of the impression I was getting, that this was maybe tied into his mental illness too, that this is something that comes and goes in cycles. He just doesn't know what world's real and what world isn't. And that gets back into what I was saying before about mental health and what he is exploring there. But yeah, this is definitely written, like, from the perspective of someone who's had experience with hallucinations and was most likely suffering from some kind of schizophrenia. And it's easy to tell why this is, like, a fan favorite for a lot of people. despite the fact that it's really short.
Well, by that standard, a lot of them are really short.
Well, I mean, this is even shorter than the last one we did. This is shorter than
That's true. It's very true.
Well, this is this one was definitely one of his more poetic pieces. At least among his early work. It's probably one of his more poetic pieces. You can definitely see the Edgar Allan Poe influence, and especially in the rhyme about the Watcher. 6 and 20,000 years have revolved till I return to the spot where now I burn. So yeah, his ability to like see what happened to Lothaway seems very much tied up with the position of the North Star in the sky. So that's interesting.
I think the last thing I'll say about this one is that oftentimes when you read fantasy, especially more modern fantasy, it can sound like people are trying too hard to sound unique or fantastical. It will come up in the names of their locations, in the names of, I don't know, their magic spells, and you're just kind of thinking like, really? Like that sounds ridiculous. But there's a lot of really ridiculous names in this story, but the way that they're used and with such just weight and majesty, and we're going to see this again with Lovecraft anytime he visits the Dreamlands. Yeah. Anytime he visits this fantastical setting, it just works, and it really shouldn't, because it does sound ridiculous. Like when you're hearing a guy describe
Lothaway sounds Welsh to me.
Yes.
So it seems like he probably draws on a lot of that language for some of his naming conventions. That's a very Tolkienian.
Yeah, I guess.
So yeah, that's something to think about, I guess.
Yeah, he says, "For I loved my native land of Lomar and the marble city of Alothaway that lies betwixt the peaks of Noton and Cataphonic." And that sounds, anyone else saying that would just not sound right. But the way Lovecraft does it, you can almost believe it's a real place. And that's part of why I'm questioning the nature of the Dreamlands in this story. Is it supposed to be a glimpse into Earth's past? Maybe. Or maybe not. Maybe it's a totally different place altogether, where nothing is the same. But it doesn't.
Maybe it's a weird mix of both.
It doesn't matter, because he wants to go there, and he obviously doesn't want to be in his house near the swamp.
This place is terrible. Oh my god, let me out of here. Yeah,
there's no adventure.
Because at first he seems to almost have an affection for the trees in the swamp, and then like by the end of the story, I think he calls them evil. I don't remember exactly what that line was.
I'll look for it.
Or wicked, or something like that, like, or foul, maybe is the word he uses.
He definitely describes the pole star as evil. I don't know about the trees. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything.
Okay, maybe
I'm not seeing anything about the trees, but he does describe it is him being in the house of stone and brick is an unnatural dream. And he describes the swamp as being sinister.
Right.
So I don't know about the trees.
Okay. Maybe it was the swamp one.
Okay. There's one more thing that I will mention. Because when he wakes up from Alothaway, from once he's dozed off thanks to the pole star, and he's trying to convince people, I guess the people in the real world, that the Anudos are invading, and they don't reciprocate this. They don't believe him. They obviously think he's crazy,
Right.
because he's babbling about faraway lands like Lomar that don't exist in this world. But he describes, but these creatures are demons, for they laugh at me and tell me I am not dreaming. They mock me whilst I sleep. And it's such a weird description.
Yeah.
Just like, he sees that really does play into how mentally unstable he is by the end. Is he in the real world, what we have to assume is the real world, he starts seeing everyone around him as demons.
Yep. Well, he's convinced he's still asleep, that this world isn't the real one, and that his real world is in Alothaway. And so, yeah, he's really he's really lost it by the end of it.
Oh, that's a theme that we're probably never going to get over.
Nope. Madness is a regular Lovecraftian theme that we will likely never get around.
That's what sets his fantasy apart. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of fantasy can be, you obviously have your very notable stories, but a lot of it can kind of flow together, and it doesn't stand out. Oh, bless you. But a lot of it can just kind of flow together. And what makes Lovecraft have a distinct stamp on it is that it does maintain a horror at its core. This very much is a horror story. It's told with fantastical settings and characters.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right. That's about all I have to say about that one. Anything else from you?
No, this was a shorter episode, I think, because there's not a lot, there's a lot that goes on in this story, but there's not a lot to tell about it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very well written. It's one of my favorite Lovecraft pieces, one of his earlier works, obviously. I really do think this is more of a foundation for the dream cycle than it ever was meant to necessarily be like an entry, I think. Because that's just how it seems to me. Maybe he didn't know what direction he was going with this at the time. That later the Dreamlands would take on a kind of life of their own. But yeah, this is definitely a great one to read. I definitely recommend anybody that is interested in this story pick it up, because it's good.
I like our schedule going forward because it's not like we get them all at once. There are some buffers here and there of stories that have nothing to do with the dream cycle, but a lot of the ones upcoming are in the dream cycle. All right, I think that's going to do it for this episode. Of course, if you would like to leave us feedback, you can either leave a comment on this video, and if it's anything substantial or questions or comments, concerns, we will get to that and we will discuss it on the show. Or if you would like to email us, it is Court of Azathoth Cast. That's all one word, all lowercase, Court of Azathoth Cast @gmail.com. I've been Reese.
I've been Zach.
All right. And we will see you next week.
Have a good one, everybody.